Hello and welcome RSI chess players, Mike Fellman here, and today we're going to be talking about the danger of moving flank pawns. So I've been stressing to you kind of since the beginning of the year about how dangerous it can be and how much trouble you can get in if you move pawns on the side of the board, so F, G, and H, or C, B, and A pawns, how you can get in trouble and how you should really try to keep those moves to a minimum and not really move any of those pawns for maybe the first 12 moves, and then maybe move only one or two after that. So we're going to be looking at what can happen if you ignore that rule and the how quickly you can lose the game. So this is a game between two grandmasters, an American, Ray Robson, and a Hungarian player, Zoltan Almazy. And again, unfortunately, if you're rooting for the home team, you're going to be disappointed that Almazy wins this game very, very convincingly, specifically because Robson just moves way too many edge pawns in the beginning of the game. Now, we talked about when it might be, at times it's okay to move flank pawns. So maybe we should check back at the game we saw in lesson 2, or lesson 3 that is. This is Vosha Benjamin, d4, ed4, knight d4, bishop c5. So we achieved the little center setup, again characterized by the white d pawn being traded for the black e pawn, pawn on e4, pawn on d6. Talked about how black is again pushing to get d5 in to equalize the space in the center. 3. And white actually plays g4 here. And again, the idea is we've gotten lots of our pieces out. So we've basically completed our development. We still need to move this bishop here, but that's going to happen, 2 moves from now. Bishop e2 is played, right? But g4 is actually kind of a sophisticated attack on the center, in the sense that if we play, the most important piece for supporting the d5 advance is we're going to play g5 is this knight on f6, and by playing g5 we drive the knight away and therefore hinder or delay this d5 advance by white. So that was a kind of a concrete idea, and was pretty interesting that we saw in this other game. And really quickly, why don't we take a look at what we saw in lesson 2. So again, through a different order of moves, we reach the little center. D and E pawns exchanged, pawn on e4, pawn on d6. So black's going to be fighting for this the whole game. Let's run through this. c6, he's playing to try to support the d5 advance, but knight a4, hitting the queen and threatening to advance, put another pawn controlling this square. King h1, f6. Okay, so now black's method of counterattacking the center is shut down completely. f5 would just lose a pawn. d5 would lose a pawn as well. So now it's okay to advance on the flank. So now white went ahead and played g4 and was able to successfully launch a flank attack with g5. And the reason he was able to get away with moving these pawns is because black cannot counterattack his center in the center with d5 or f5. Okay, so that was a quick review of kind of the little center, and when it's possible to move flank pawns is when you basically have conquered the center is stable, and you've developed all your pieces. Now, let's go back to the game for today. Robson and Almazy. And we're going to see that white is going to flagrantly violate that rule, and despite white being one of the strongest players in the country and black being one of the strongest players in the world, white is not able to get away with this. Even though he's a grandmaster, he was absent from chess club this day and did not learn the lesson of not to move edge pawns, and somewhat embarrassingly lost this game in very, very convincing fashion. And so it can go to show that even the basic rules that we learn in chess club today, can be applied by some of the best players in the world, and how you can apply this knowledge all the way up through your chess career, and win some nice games, or maybe if you don't even win, just find some good moves and develop your chess game in a good learning environment, and at tournaments too, if we review the game afterwards, to really help you improve and appreciate really everything there is to appreciate about chess. So e4, e5, and we're looking at lots of e-pawn openings. I know some people like the London system, and I would considering we're not going to look at the London system, but we might look at some d-pawn openings later in the year. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3. So again, in lesson 2, we saw bishop b5, d4, bishop d7, castles, bishop e7, knight c3, knight f6, knight f6, rook e1, ed4, knight d4, and we reach the little center. And in lesson 3, we saw d4 right away without bishop b5, ed4, knight d4, c3, d6. Again, pawn on e4, pawn on d6, d and e pawns exchanged. In this game, we don't reach the little center. Instead, white makes somewhat of a defensive move, or he doesn't want to commit right away to d4, so he plays knight c3 and defends his puts another defender on his e-pawn. This is called it's going to transpose to the 4 knights game, because knight f6, 4 knights have been developed. So bishop b5. Another way to go would be, of course, just to play d4, pressure the e5 point, and this is a reasonable line for white to take. One reason it really hasn't been it's not played too much anymore is black has this nice pin, bishop b4, threatening knight e4. So, and he can't play bishop d3 because we take his knight, because his queen no longer controls d4. So he has to trade knights. bc6, and we're still threatening knight e4. And I get to just play my move that I really want to play when I'm facing the little center, is when I'm facing to equalize the space in the center is d5. And after ed5, black is completely equal essentially. So you can look this game up. This has been played thousands of times on the master level, and black's doing pretty well here, just because he's been able to equalize in the center and get his d5 push in to equalize the central space. So bishop b5 instead. And of course, the idea is, as we saw, bishop b5 up here, but without knight c3, and his idea is just to play bishop c6 and take on e5. So here, black played a pretty interesting move that I want you guys to take note of. He played bishop d6. And the idea is to defend this the e-pawn first of all, and gets a piece out. And so now bishop c6, we can play dc6, and we have our e-pawn defended. And the other thing it does is that it's going to allow us to maybe play d7, d5 in one move. So if we play like d6, castles, bishop d7, d4, ed4, knight d4. We still want to play d5 at some point, not here because it's not safe, of course, but we don't get to play it. We've already played d6. So this is a pretty ambitious plan by black, as he wants to say, you know what, I'm going to leave my pawn on d7, I'm going to get d5 in one move, because that's a move I really want to play. It doesn't, but now bishop d6, does that mean that the bishop, right now the d-pawn can't move with the bishop on d6, so he is implying with bishop d6 that he's going to retreat the bishop pretty quick here, and you'll see that in a second. a3. So first serious mistake of the game. a3. So what's white's setup trying to do? Well, he wants to put pressure on e5. He'd like to get more space in the center, and he'd like to get better control of the center. And one way to do that is just to play d4. After ed4, knight d4. It's white's not much better, but he's a little bit better. But a3, does that have anything to do with challenging black in the center, and black's central strong point being this e5 pawn, essentially. Well, a3 has absolutely zero, nothing, nada to do with that, so it's basically just a waste of a move. So black just goes ahead and castles. And d3. This is it's probably too much to call it a mistake, but it certainly lets black play energetically and kind of gives black no problems. d3, yes, it helps get this, clears the way for this bishop to get out, but that's just not good enough. We're at the level. You guys are in the advanced group where just developing our pieces isn't good enough. We need to develop our pieces, get all our pieces out, but also at the same time be putting maximum pressure on our opponent's center. And the way to do that again is just to play d4, because it pressures this e-pawn, and he either has to trade it off. After d4, he either needs to trade this off or play something like rook e8 and defend the e-pawn. And if he trades it off, we're happy, because now again we have this extra space in the center that I've been talking about for the past, mainly since the beginning of the year. So, okay, so d3. So black just plays rook e8. He wants to retreat his bishop to f8 and then play d7, d5. Rook e8 also defends the e-pawn, so it allows this bishop to move, because bishop c6 and our e-pawn's defended. And now, well, we're going to talk about g4. Now, white plays essentially what is the losing move of the game. And losing, I don't mean in a sense that I don't think that white should quit playing the game after he plays this move, but just in a practical sense that it's going to be because he's moved so many edge pawns and black can counterattack so quickly. As you're going to see, white's going to be on his knees defending for a very long time and is going to be lucky to survive, essentially, because he's moved so many edge pawns. Now, when I say moving edge pawns, so he's only moved 2 edge pawns, right? But when you're playing, even though white himself is a grandmaster, he's playing an even stronger grandmaster who's, rated 2707s in the top 30 players in the world, and is able to punish these kind of flagrant a3 and g4, flagrant violations of opening principles of just not moving flank pawns, developing as quickly as possible, pretty convincingly. So g4. Now let's talk about the Vovcha game, or the from lesson 3, Eli Vovcha versus Joel Benjamin, which we saw earlier in this video. G4, G5 was an idea to stop the D5 advance. Well, that was after white had established his superiority in the center, already established little center, and had already developed a lot more pieces. So I believe if we click back. Okay, g4 did not occur until we'd after gotten every piece out but this bishop, and we'd already castled our king safely. And really, this bishop comes out in a move or two. So we've basically completed our whole development. Here, white's playing g4. This bishop hasn't come out. We haven't castled our queen. Our king, excuse me, our queen's still on d1. So it's very dubious. Bishop f8. Just clearing the way to advance d7, d5. And he has to play bishop g5. Unfortunately, g5 doesn't quite work. Knight h5, knight e5, knight e5. Queen h5, a6. I'm going to run through this variation. Rook b1 to defend this pawn and develop this bishop. But bishop e5, and black has a very nice game here. He has bishops are going to be a little bit better than this knight because it's an open board, and it's kind of be hard to develop this bishop without allowing us to maybe play bishop c3 and invade down the b file. So black and these pawns on g5 and e4 are quite weak. So and he's going to be white's going to have to invest resources in defending those pawns. So black's doing quite well here. So instead he played bishop g5, and now the question is, well, what was g4 doing? It can't even advance to g5 to drive this knight away. So now Black's looking at the position. He says, "Okay, well, I'd really like to play d5 and get a superiority in the center. Although I can't do it right now because it's not safe. My knight's pinned, and if I play d5, of course, he can just take me. I can't even take back with my knight because I'd lose my queen. Things are looking pretty ugly. So I really need to find another way to attack d5. Well, c6 would be really nice, but my knight's there right now. But this knight can't, so I need to move my knight to play c6. But where should I move my knight? Well, if I play knight e7, do control d5, but maybe you can play bishop f6 and double my pawns. Don't really like that. Although it wouldn't be the end of the world. Knight a5, well, that's way away from the center. Knight b8 puts the knight back on its original square, so I undevelop a piece. That's not so good. So almost by process of elimination, we can find knight d4. And knight d4 also has the advantage of attacking this bishop. And if white allows us to take the bishop, this knight will have to take the bishop and will be driven. This knight, which helps control d5, will be driven away, and we can play c6, knight c3, and d5. Or if he takes us, we play ed4. This knight, which controls c3, is forced to move c6, bishop c4, and d5. And black's doing great. So either way, we're going to be driving this knight away and forcing enforcing d5. So white didn't choose knight d4 or allowing us to take on b5, removing the knight, or making this knight move by taking us back. Instead, he played bishop c4. So black got on with things c6, and now white played rook g1. So already you can see how this pawn being on g4 is kind of a big issue, because if we're allowed to play, once this d pawn moves, the bishop on c8 is going to be attacking. So for example, if he plays like if he plays knight can't even play knight e2 again, because this f3 square is not defended because we moved this pawn. So if he tries like say maybe bishop h4 to allow him to advance this pawn, we can play d5. And now if he moves his bishop back, we can play bishop g4, hitting. So we're threatening to almost just to take this pawn again. So white played rook g1 to defend the g4 point, but unfortunately, black is able to respond pretty quickly. So he played h6. He wants to force this bishop to take on f6. So if black retreats, we can play for d5. We can so just d5 and then taking on g4 at some point. Or we can, okay, so h6 to force a resolution. It is moving a edge pawn, but it's forcing this bishop to take us. Queen f6. Now we're threatening this knight on f3, so he has to move the knight or trade it off. Again, if the pawn's on g2, this isn't nearly as big an issue because our knight's defended. Knight d4, ed4, knight e2, and d5. Looks like it's losing a pawn. Looks like it's not safe, but we're going to open this deadly rook file up on the king. ed5. This g pawn's going to be weak too. Queen h4, threatening bishop g4. dc6, bishop g4, cb7, rook ab8, saving our rook. And now white's already in some dire straits here. So we're threatened. Our big threat is just rook e2 or bishop e2, and then if he takes us back, we just take, and we've won a queen for a rook. We've given him a rook and a bishop, and we've gotten a queen and a knight. So we've essentially gotten we traded bishop for knight, which is 3 for 3, and we traded our rook for his queen, which is 5 for 9. So 4-point swing for us. That's pretty good. And there's no real way to defend this piece again. F3 isn't possible. and wouldn't even be good if it was, because we can just take with the bishop, and f3 would be check, of course. So white thought his best option was, he doesn't like doing it, but his best option is simply giving up 5 for 3 and only losing 2 points. He played rook g4, queen g4. So we've already won some material, and we're going to be able to keep attacking. King f1, he wants to be able to move this knight. Rook b7, b4, yet another edge pawn, but now we are attacking this. So b4, queen h5, attacking the h2 point, knight d4, queen h3 check, king g1, and now we just bring in our other rook. Rook b7, knight f3, and now black could have won instantaneously with a very clever move. And the way to find this is you have to say, okay, if we could take this e7 rook and put it anywhere on the board, where would we want to put it? Well, I'd want it on g6, right? Because then that hits the king. The king has to step over to h1, and then queen g2 is checkmate. So how can I get my rook to g6? Well, I could play rook e6, but then his bishop just takes me. Well, so that's kind of what black saw and stopped calculating. But had he looked to move forward, he would have seen his other rook can take. So rook e6, bishop e6, rook e6, and all of a sudden, rook g6 is impossible to stop. And he can't run with his king this way because queen f1, that's check. King f1 would be check. And he can't effectively guard the g2 square. So for example, queen f1, rook g6 check, king f1 check, queen g2 only move, queen g2 checkmate. So because black is winning this, and again, because this g pawn ran forward and then the king had to come over to the king side, there's no pawn cover, and we're able to penetrate decisively with our queen and our rook versus a sole knight, which is defending. This queen's not really defending because it can't coordinate well with this knight. So again, this is also another example of a superiority of force. We can even bring this bishop in if we need to, and then we'd have at least 3 attackers, and we have 3 attackers, and he has 1 defender of the knight, and maybe the queen's defending too if you want to count that. But you can be pretty sure that with a 3 versus 2 majority, attackers versus defenders, there's going to be a decisive maneuver, and that's the case here. So there's just nothing you can do to stop rook g6 check. But he missed that. Instead, he played rook e2, which is pretty good as well. It continues attacking and allows us to bring this bishop into d6 and should win the game. And it also carries its own direct threat of we are threatening queen f3 because, of course, with the rook on e2, the queen no longer defends the f3 point. So black played bishop d5 to defend the f3 point, and we played bishop d6, c4, defending the bishop, and now we bring the 4th piece in with decisive effect, which wins the game. And again, you can find this by visualizing rook e3 double exclam. So the question is, which piece do we really not like of white's? Well, obviously, if we get rid of this knight, we can take on h2 and checkmate him, right? So for example, if this knight moves here, we can play check, king h1, check, check, checkmate, right? So this knight on h2 cannot move. Or, no, excuse me, the knight on f3 cannot move because it defends h2. Now, if we could somehow take this knight, and that would be the same as taking it off the board or making it move so it doesn't defend h2. So but I don't see a good way to attack it. Well, the only way I really see to attack it is rook e3. Doesn't that allow him to take us? Well, if he takes us, queen g2 is checkmate. And if he doesn't take us, we play rook f3 and we take on h2. And so there's really no way to stop checkmate here, and the only without losing massive amounts of material essentially. So uh, one try might be queen f1, but then just the simple rook f3, queen h3, rook h3, and we're still taking on h2, and we should be checkmating pretty quickly, especially being up a whole rook. And as I covered, fe3 doesn't work. So in this position, white called it a day and resigned. So what did we learn? Well, we saw that moving these flank pawns, again, remember I said at the beginning of the lesson, maybe you should move any flank pawns before move 12. Well, white moved 2 flank pawns in the first 7 moves, and it ended up costing him the entire game essentially because black was able to quickly counterattack, complete his development. And with deadly effect. So this serves as yet another example of how moving flank pawns before you've developed all your pieces and stabilized the center can be a mistake that even grandmasters make and can be used to win games even at the highest level of chess. So this is Mike Fellman signing off.